we have a quorum? Yes, we do. Okay. I call the meeting of the Boston Regional Metropolitan Planning Organization Administration and Finance Committee to order. I'm going to read the virtual meeting guidelines. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants can mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either the participants button at the bottom of the screen and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom or a reactions button in the toolbar. I will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you are having technical difficulties, please contact the amazing Jonathan Church via chat box or email jchurch@ctps.org or 857-702-3709. And Jonathan appreciates calls very early in the morning, I'm told. I'm going to read the accessibility statement. This meeting is being recorded. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodation in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Jonathan Church via the chat box, via email at jchurch@ctps.org or 857-702-3709. Thank you. My name is Brian Kane. I am chair of the Administration and Finance Committee for the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization Board. And we will now do a digital roll call of committee members who are present using the membership spreadsheet, which I don't have in front of me. But I can see who's here and who's not here. So just in terms of who is on my screen, Eric Barassa.
Good morning, Eric Barassa with MAPC.
Morning, Eric. Leonard Diggins.
Leonard here.
Thank you. Derek Cravat.
Yep. Good morning. Derek Cravat here, calling in from MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning.
Thank you, Derek. And who's iPhone 2?
Dennis Giambetti, Metro West.
Oh, there it is. Welcome,
Good
Dennis.
morning.
Thank you. I think that's all of our members. Did I get that right? Okay.
Yes, you did.
Wow. Look at me on a roll. Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item 2, which is public comment. If any member of the public would like to comment, please identify yourself by raising your hand and you'll be allowed to comment. You can also send written comments to Jonathan Church at jchurch@ctps.org if you are able. We have 14 participants and I don't see anyone raising their hand. If you would like to raise your hand later on, please, excuse me, if you'd like to comment later on, we will certainly try and get to you. Item 3, summary of the July 6th, 2022 meeting. This was available on the link. I hope folks had a chance to review it. And at this time, I will ask for a motion and a second to approve the summary of the July 6th meeting as presented.
I'll make that motion, Eric Barassa with MAPC.
Moved by Eric. Is there a second?
Leonard Diggins, Advisory Council, second.
Seconded by Len. Logan, Jonathan, you want to call the roll or do I call the roll?
Typically, you call the roll, Mr. Chair, but I can do it for you.
Well, your voice is so much nicer than mine. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Oh, okay. Brian Kane,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Sorry there, yes.
Derek Cravat,
Yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Yes, and it is a soothing voice you have, Jonathan.
Oh, thank you. And last but not least, Dennis Giambetti.
Yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. It's dulcet tones, one might even go so far as to say. Item 4, we're gonna have a discussion of the overview of the draft timeline of MPO operations. Logan, are you gonna project that for us? Thank you, sir. So I hope folks have had a chance to look at this. So we're trying to just sort of get a grasp of everything that the organization and the board kind of does in a typical year. Also, what we say we're going to do in terms of the MOU, as well as practice, and also kind of what are the steps that are kind of prerequisites to do that and whatnot. So I'm not going to go through this one by one, but there are important sort of things here. And what I have found is that a timeline really sets the tone for everything that sort of follows it. And I want to give the staff a lot of credit for combing through several other documents and whatnot to get to this. There's things on here that relate to lots of the other stuff that we've talked about. You know, for instance, the MOU suggests we need to elect the vice chair annually. That's on here. There's some RTech advisory council, things on here because it is such an important part of what we do. Can you scroll down a little bit, Logan, please? Thank you. And you can also sort of see there are lots of tasks for the staff about when we're supposed to post things, when we're supposed to get feedback from MassDOT, MARPA, the board, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, to me, a really important document that really spells out sort of what the organization is supposed to do. And it really, I think, gives us a roadmap for moving forward. If we just go down a little bit more, Logan, as you can see, when we get to the spring, again, it's a tip time. This is what all of us are so fond of. It's where we do the coordination with DOT and project readiness, project readiness committee, RTAs, all of the other stakeholders that are involved in how we allocate our funds. And so a lot of it is also for the CTPS folks doing their behind the scenes work. And this is work that already goes on. I just think it's nice to have it written down in such a form that it's visible to us. And I think it'll also help a lot with our requests of, I don't know why I say our, I mean board member requests of staff for certain information, certain projects, certain data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's just go down a little bit more, Logan. Thank you very much. You can see here, as we get to the summer, things quiet down a little bit, at least on paper. We know in reality that's not true because the CTPS folks are always working hard. But I think it's good to see that we're documenting how we approve the process of nominating and electing positions, for instance, Eric, which is something that we usually do in August, but I guess we should be doing a little closer to June. June, July kind of time frame so that we give enough information to folks. If you look on the right one there for July, the implementing agencies submit project status updates. You see that several times layered throughout the document. We are supposed to be getting quarterly updates from our implementing agencies on projects that we fund. I don't believe we're doing much of this right now. But this is, I think it's by writing it down on this timeline and putting it out there, I think it's going to help us sort of live up to what we say we're going to do in the MOU. And that's what this operations plan is really all about. And let's just go down a little bit more, Logan. So as you can see, as we get into this time of year, We have what we do in August, the elections, and the CTPS ends their fiscal year at the end of this month because they're on the federal fiscal year. Yeah, Logan, can you just, I'm sorry, I missed talking about the annual meeting. Can you just go up to where that is, please?
It'll be
Where
December,
we-
January.
Yeah, where we bring in the new folks. Do we put that on there? Okay,
So it does not have the, Brian, if I may, it does not yet
Please.
have the annual meeting that you recently discussed in the operations plan discussion.
okay,
And just for clarification, this is the first draft of a timeline, which as we modify it as operation plan elements are like decided upon and finalized, we'll layer that information into this document. And in the end, with the operations plan, can actually post something with that is, we can also improve on sort of the layout, the graphics, make sure that it's worded in a way that is most accessible. But this is that first draft. So things like the annual meeting we discussed last time isn't quite in here yet in terms of timing.
that makes
But we
sense.
talked- yeah.
So, but the new members will take office in October, is that what we're thinking, or, because we do the elections in September?
Yeah, go up to, if you don't mind, Logan, scrolling up to November, I believe. So you see in November.
There it is.
Yeah, so it doesn't say the annual meeting, but it does say
Yep.
the new MPO members, the vice chair election.
That's what I was looking for, yep,
Exactly, yeah.
great.
I thought you were talking about the Martha meeting. My apologies, is the annual
Nope,
meeting?
Nope, I was not clear. But yeah, so this is where we talked about, we'll do the vice chair election. We'll have our new members who get elected in September, take office. And it is sort of the great reset following the MAPC fall council meetings. So that's, I think it's important that we sort of note that and put that on there as the time when we kind of begin anew. So I think this timeline is really, really great. And as Tegan said, it's a work in progress, but even getting this far, I think is a huge step forward. And I, for one, just wanted to thank everybody for their hard work on it. That's not to say it's complete. It certainly isn't. And new things will be added all the time. We should talk about a procedure to kind of amend this and add to it. I think it's got to be a living document, one that sort of continually gets talked about and changed. But in terms of progress, I think we've taken a big step forward here. So I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments, but I, for one, think this is awesome.
Well, I think it's good. I think it's great. I do have a couple of questions. Well, first off, I'll say I like the fourth bullet, regarding, hold on a second, let me get the document on the screen. In October, that has the advisory council, and sometimes I'm going to say RTAC just because it's two syllables, we provide some input, and so maybe we'll try and do it this cycle. The board can tell us whether the input we're making is helpful in ways that we can make the information more helpful. And certainly given the advisory council's feelings about this last cycle of the CTPS, I think it'd be really helpful to get us involved even earlier. So maybe we can figure out what works for everyone. Respect to that. My question is though, for the tip ultimately has to be approved. When is that? August, September? Regardless of when we do it, the feds are expecting it when?
The federal partners have said that they need to get it by mid-August so that they can approve it by the end of the fiscal year. They like the fact that we do the tip earlier than the UPWP so that they can do tips and UPWPs separately and not have overlap in review process due to staffing at their level. But that is technically where it is. We've been asked to do them earlier as part of the scheduling of staffing at the federal partners.
Oh, okay, so it's on the feds are asking for it earlier,
Well,
not the state.
Well, the state has asked it in an effort to coordinate with the CIP and other efforts, but it also works on the federal end because then their staff can review tips from all the different MPOs in the state, and then they can move into doing UPWPs thereafter.
Gotcha. Okay. And you'll see where I'm going at with this next question. So let's say we put out the draft tip, we get a comment, and it's so important that we decide that we want to make a change, a serious change, to the tip. Would we then have to re-release? We have to release another draft for review, or would it be like, well, we released it, we got input, we've changed it, and now that is the final version that we sign off on?
It depends on the nature of the change. If it's something that is, we're adding a new project in, or something to that effect, something that is significant that wasn't in the original draft for review, then there could be a reason to put it out again. If it's a text edit or something that says, no, this was incorrectly stated, those we can typically do without having to reboot. It depends on the nature of the item that's being requested.
Right. Well, it's interesting, just answer that way because the way I phrase it is like, it's going to be a meaningful change. It would result in a project removal, probably addition. And it's as if we have now put ourselves in a position where we can't possibly make a major change based on what we hear from whomever on a draft, because then we just run out of time. And so that seems problematic for me, just as a overall policy point of view, coming from the feds or whomever. And so if that is the case, it's kind of going to make what I say now moot. But I guess I would like to see us have some kind of a way of really assessing the input that we get, from the draft, and then really potentially reassessing, what we put out as the tip, because right now we get comments from whomever, and we really can't do much, because we were essentially out of time, and we're counting now on whomever makes the comments. We're counting on them having contacted staff, and staff having gone over those comments so that they at least feel like they've been heard, and if there are any changes that result from it, it'd be incorporated into the next tip somehow. And I know what I'm saying is getting a little confusing and maybe confounding, but that's because I feel as if it's a confusing and confounding process at that point. So that's all I have to say.
Well, I guess, Len, to respond from my perspective, we already have an amendment process to amend the tip. And in terms of this timeline, that's one of those things that's ongoing and will happen ad hoc based on requirements.
Right.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, are you asking if and when the tip is amended based on comments, feedback, et cetera, how do we report it out to Federal Highway?
No, I'm saying that before we approve of the tip in a given cycle. So right now we are supposed to approve the tip in May, and I think it is. And so we put the draft out in April, so yeah, the tip, the MPO endorses the tip in May, and then we put out the draft in April. And I'm saying that if when we put out the draft for comment, we get comments that make us go, maybe we shouldn't have a project in there, and maybe we should put another project in. It seems like now if we are saying that, well, now if we swap projects, we're going to have to put that draft out for another review, then we can't do it because we don't have time, right?
Right. I see what you're saying now. Yeah. So this gets into the whole finalizing the tip issue,
right?
That we have not really wrestled with yet. So I guess I would say that the timeline here is idealized to a certain extent. There will always be things that need to change. And I guess I would respectfully request that you hold that question until we kind of wrestle with how we do the tip final approval, which I think we will get to. But as far as this timeline goes, I do think it's important to put goals, objectives, milestones on here, even though we might not always reach them, because I do hear what you're saying, and it's messy every year. I get it. It was very messy this year. But I don't think we can necessarily let the perfect get in the way of the good.
Yeah, well, yeah, I hear you, and that's really not what, I mean, I'm not going for a perfect process. I mean, first off, as I said, yeah, I think there's a systemic problem. I mean, if we need to put out a draft again, anytime we make a change based on a significant change based on a comment, because
Right.
I mean, yeah, it just, I mean, I don't understand how that could possibly work, you know. And second, well, I forget the second, but anyways, so I'm set.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see other hands up, so I'm gonna stop.
We're on your side here.
Yeah,
Dennis,
no,
I saw your hand up.
Oh.
Sorry, Len, are you good?
yeah, I'm gonna, and we're on the same side.
Okay. Dennis, did you put your hand down, it looks like.
Well, I'll raise it again, I guess. Thanks for recognizing me. Just a quick comment. One of the things I think the staff does a very good job of, and I don't think it's highlighted in the outline, was they reach out to the various communities and kind of give an overview of the TIP process and the importance of the TIP process and how you engage a project that you may be interested in within your region or your community. With the turnover in the region by folks, I find it always refreshing and rewarding for folks to hear it again each year, right? And I was wondering if we should document it somewhere so that the staff is reminded to go out and reach out to the various communities to kind of highlight the process itself and how do you get engaged into the process. Anyways, just a thought.
Good point. Good point, Derek. Tegan, I see you nodding, so I'm going to assume you agree with that. And thank you. We'll get that updated, Derek. Good point. Go ahead, Tegan.
Yeah, I was going to say, and to your earlier point, I think we can get into these types of elements a bit deeper when we do go over kind of the workflow, work product, work approval discussion topics, which is a little later kind of scheduled in these operations plan meetings. But yes, I made a note of that, and we can continue to think about elements like that we should layer in here to help guide the process.
Go ahead, Derek.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to speak to Len's question and comment. And I agree with Jonathan. In general, it's ideal to have a tip that's out for draft, or the final that matches the draft with regard to a project listing. But if there are extenuating circumstances, I think there is some precedent for making, project changes, and there is some flexibility from Federal Highway and from, the capital planning folks at MassDOT. We just have to, be open about communication and communicating things clearly. So I think if there are changes to project listings during a public comment period, it is something we can, entertain as long as the MPO is supportive, and there is some degree of precedent there for that. So I just wanted to say, if there's extenuating circumstances, I think it's something we've done before. Obviously not ideal, but can be done. So just wanted to throw that out there. And then if there are changes after the final tip is approved, we have always a pretty long list of first quarter amendments and adjustments that we line up that we're actually doing right now as in the process of. So every time between the final STIP approval and the next first quarter, we do keep track of things that need to be changed and make sure that those get changed as soon as the STIP is approved and we can start making changes to it. So just wanted to throw those things out there for consideration as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Derek. So I want to move on to the officers, but I did just want to sort of note that this timeline is going to really be kind of a driving document going forward for us. So I think it's important that we all kind of agree, not necessarily on every single detail, but certainly on the layout and the structure of it, safe in the knowledge that it will be changed in terms of the details. But I think this is a big step forward for us. And if we could, sort of tease out a little bit more from each of these bullets, I think we'll have a really solid operations plan at the end of this process. So again, my thanks to staff for pulling this together and synthesizing so many different documents. So we'll come back to this, but this is sort of an umbrella document that we should all kind of dig into a little bit and get used to. Oh, I see some chats that I haven't looked at. Yep. Okay. So let's go on. Oh, Derek, did you want to say something again, or is your hand up from before?
Nope, my mistake. I just, put it down. Sorry about that.
Okay, high five to you. Let's go to the officers. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thanks, Eric. So we have talked about officers before. We've had some information that talks about what the MOU states. I think we all agree that parts of the MOU need to be cleaned up and kind of clarified. But this is obvious that the chair is the Secretary of Transportation. The MOU states that the chair of the Boston MPO is the secretary or the secretary's designee. The vice chair, as we all know, has to be a municipal representative and has been MAPC's forever. And we're going to elect the vice chair now starting annually. So yeah, I guess what I would like to do, what I would suggest as a path forward is the next time this committee meets, I would like to have a vote to approve this section of the plan. Yes, Tegan, go ahead. I thought you would raise your hand.
I'm sorry, there were a few comments throughout this document that could generate a little bit more discussion. Did you want to sort of work on, refining or finalizing those?
Yeah, no, I was going to do that.
Okay, great.
I was
Okay,
just I was trying to set the table.
Gotcha.
So-
Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. No, thank you. We're going to, so safe in the knowledge that we need to move forward with this. I would like to ask staff to please put this up for a vote at the next meeting, which means we need to kind of get these details kind of right. So, Len, are you trying to say something?
No, did it look like it? What else are doing?
I'm just so focused on you and all you do, Len, that
Maybe I
so
should
yes,
just knock out my video. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
we had some issues here that I think we should tease out here. So the first one is expanding on the agenda setting duties. What the MOU sort of says is very vague in terms of, the chair and the vice chair shall work with staff to do some agenda setting. So I think the agenda setting process could be certainly improved. I understand that there are certain things that have to get done on a monthly basis, and was really one of the reasons why we put the timeline together, so that we all had an overarching sense of what that is. In terms of agenda setting, maybe Tegan or Gina or someone, can I ask you to sort of explain how it works now?
I lost my cursor. I'm sorry, my mouse cursor. Actually, I think Jonathan, you're the best one to walk through the agenda setting process, and maybe with Eric's support, since Eric's also part of the meeting to set those agendas.
Eric had to drop out, unfortunately.
Oh, that's right. You dropped out halfway through. Yeah. Okay. Jonathan, do you mind?
Sure, not at all. So what we do is typically either 6 weeks or more in advance, we try to get agenda topics lined up for the next MPO meeting that would be coming up within that time frame. We meet, staff meets with the Office of Transportation Planning staff, like David, the chair, Eric, the vice chair, some other OTP staff, and we set the agenda based on those topics that we know are there, based on either work scopes, for example, that would need to be approved by the MPO, presentations from MPO work, or timely efforts that might be needed for MPO documents such as the TIP or the UPWP. We also try to bring at times various other items. But once we meet 10 days before an MPO meeting for that agenda setting meeting for that week, we set that agenda in stone. We then put that agenda together, put it through our internal processes, and then post it the Thursday before the MPO meeting, along with any materials that we have ready. And then we will continue to post materials up through the Tuesday before an MPO meeting as needed for that process.
So let me ask this, from the operations plan perspective, does it make sense to spell some of that out in this document? In other words, kind of what the cadence you just suggested is. Tegan, I saw you on mute.
Yeah, so Jonathan, please feel free to weigh in as well. I think it does make sense to provide a little bit more clarity in the process. One of the other questions was sort of, there's the vice chair role in setting the agenda, which at this point, I think, and I look back at my notes from last time, and we actually said we'd defer the conversation until Eric was here. And of course, now he's not here again.
Such is
but-
life.
But I think what ends up happening is that, you know, the vice chair's weigh-in is really just at that one meeting, I believe. That might be correct, Jonathan. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And so the question is, do we want to elaborate on that role? What collaborate actually means for the vice chair, and or any other more specific kind of input or interaction that the vice chair or otherwise would have with the rest of the board to ensure that the agenda items that the board wants to see is on the agenda. Right now, it's, I think, very streamlined, and that's fine if the board's comfortable with that. But that's sort of the question we have as to whether you feel like what we do now is capturing this statement that the vice chair shall collaborate, which is what's in the MOU.
Right, I remember this discussion, and we talked about how the vice chair traditionally brings member items, municipal items, things like that. I mean, so it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, like this is really a staff-driven process right now. Is that not correct? Okay, so it sounds like it is a staff-driven process, and I'm okay with it being a staff-driven process.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
No, I was just going to agree with you that it is a staff-driven process. Yes.
So maybe for next time, can we spell out the sort of cadence that you just went through, Jonathan? Kind of, you know, without getting too specific. We don't want to lock ourselves into things, but you know, traditionally 2 weeks before, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you know, no later than 2 days before because of open meeting laws, et cetera, like that. In terms of how the vice chair, quote unquote, collaborates, I think we could add something along the lines of, well, let me ask this question. Do we want the vice chair and the chair to concur and agree on the agenda as a requirement? Or how does it work now?
They typically concur on the agenda together because they're both at the agenda setting meeting.
Okay,
And until we get both of their okays, we don't proceed toward making a final agenda.
okay. So I guess I would suggest, and I don't know, Len and Derek and Dennis, how you feel, but I think we could actually include some language in here that says, you know, no agenda shall be published without the concurrence of the chair, the vice chair, and the, yeah. Of course, now that sets up a potential veto for either one, which is always a problem. So I would also add some language that suggests if there's not a concurrence, then it's got to go to the full board or the A&F committee or some committee to be decided by majority vote.
Wow.
Well,
So that tension is coming up 10 days before the meeting. And so you're now saying that you now have to have a meeting of some other body in order to determine what's going to go on. The agenda is coming up in 10 days or what?
no, I guess it wouldn't go on the next meeting's agenda,
Okay,
but the full body would have to discuss whether it should be on the agenda to follow.
right.
Because theoretically, boards themselves decide their own agendas. What we've done is ceded it to the vice chair and the chair and the staff, which is perfectly fine. That's how it works in my town. I'm sure that's how it works in your town too, Len.
In terms of like the select board's agenda?
Yeah.
No, the chair makes the agenda.
You make the whole agenda
I make the whole agenda,
or start, but the staff gives you stuff. That says you
Well,
gotta
staff
put
gives
this on,
stuff,
you gotta put
yeah,
this on.
but the final word's on the chair, and then the vice chair, does not concur, we consult, as desired on both our parts, But that's not simply me, it's just the way it is with the town. I mean, it's how it is. Every chair behaves that way. So ultimately the chair decides what's on the agenda. Gets advice from the vice chair, but vice chair doesn't have any veto power over the agenda. And everything's up for discussion in the business. I mean, if anyone's unhappy with anything, they can make their feelings known at the meeting to the rest of the board.
Say again, you unmuted.
Well, I was going to say, again, Jonathan, if you want to add anything, I would say that probably what Len described more accurately sort of reflects what happens now, so that we look for both the approval of both, but in the end, it's the chair that kind of makes that final call on what is fully on the agenda and has the ability to say that something that in theory and is unusual, but if the vice chair is asking about a certain item and like on the agenda, but the chair doesn't feel that it's appropriate, then the chair is able to make that call to keep something on or remove it. But we never walk out of one of those meetings with,
Right.
somebody wanting to veto each other, but there's generally concurrence, but sometimes there are topics that are debatable or debated.
Okay.
What I wanted to ask you as well is, I think we can definitely include language about concurrence and vetoing if this committee would like. I also would ask if you're interested in including any direct language about coordination, or if the vice chair has some role in collaborating with the other board members, just to pull the board members into the process, or leave it the way that it is now, which is really just the chair and the vice chair, and that's completely up to you.
I mean, I guess I would say that ideally, yes, but in reality, that probably won't happen except on certain hot button issues, right? So what if we add language that says the vice chair, okay, go ahead, Dennis. Mr. iPhone 2.
Dennis, you may not know you're muted, maybe?
Is it *6?
Sorry, I'm sorry. At the end of the day, if the vice chair loses a battle with the chair over a particular item, can he or she still go to the full MPO board and request a item to be put on the agenda if they feel strongly enough about that? And the MPO could vote on that agenda item, right? Is that an option?
Well, that's kind of what I'm trying to suggest.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's probably without putting too much language into a dispute between the chair and the vice chair, just have the, vice chair have the ability to go to the full board. That'd be my recommendation.
Yeah.
And that's how,
That makes sense.
that's how Framingham and other communities that I know of work with their select board. Is that, the chair tends to have the final say on what's the agenda, but a member can always go to the full board and get a vote and put something on.
Right. No, I completely agree. And that I was trying to suggest a process for that. But maybe we don't have to make it so formal. So what if we said something in terms of the vice chair, the vice chair, in collaborating on agenda setting, the vice chair shall attempt to represent municipalities and other regional bodies to ensure adequate representation or adequate discussion of things.
Could we have some language that's a little bit stronger that may suggest that any member can request an agenda item with the consent of the full board? So then the vice chair can then always do that as part of that process.
Yeah, I like that, because I think, thinking through, the issue, the scenario that you're raising, Brian, it's like, I think at a deeper level, you're concerned about what happens if there's a rift really between the vice chair and the chair, and then how do we deal with that as a board, so I think what Dennis just suggested would take care of that.
Yeah. You're so eloquent, Dennis. Thank you. You
You
said it
call
in, you said it in like 6 words what I was just rambling on about in a paragraph. So you must have been a select board member before or something.
Oh, trust
Many-
me.
Many years.
Of course,
They-
of course. All right, so let me ask Jonathan, do you feel like you got a sense of what we were trying to say?
I do. So I will draft that.
All right, so we'll move on to the next one, which is the nominating process. So I was suggesting that only a municipality or a regional entity should be the person to nominate someone for the position of vice chair. And that's because the vice chair has to be from one of those groups. I guess I don't want MassDOT, which has so much power now, to necessarily handpick the vice chair over the objections of the rest of the body. And again, this is completely hypothetical, and I'm not saying it's what we're doing right now. We also need to make sure that the nominations take place in advance in case there is a contested nomination. Again, I don't particularly see that happening. So the idea is that a city or town or myself or Eric would, or I should say the advisory board or MAPC would nominate, or I guess even an RTA would nominate someone at a meeting, and then the following meeting there'd be an election as part of the meeting's agenda. So I guess, the question to Len and Derek and everybody is, does it make sense what I'm saying to limit nomination of a vice chair to those who are eligible to hold the position?
That makes sense to me. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, in this context, it does. Yes.
All right. Sounds like we're concurring. Jonathan, you good on that one?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, let's go down to the next one, please, Mr. Casey. Yep. Annual meeting, we talked about this. And this is something that the MOU speaks to this within, no, it doesn't, excuse me. But we're talking about within 30 days of the election, we'll try to have what we're calling our annual meeting, which we're trying to make kind of a kind of special. We'll see if the secretary can come and say hello. This is where we'll impanel the new board members and kind of any new designees. And so this is also where we'll elect the vice chair and, I don't know, swear them in on the copy of the Constitution or something. That'd be kind of cool. Tegan.
I think the one trick with the timing here and what we were discussing relative to the MOU, if I'm remembering correctly, is that the MOU specifically says that the election takes place at the first meeting after that election process concludes. And so that means that the annual meeting, to be in compliance, I think, with what, if we're going to elect the vice chair there to be in compliance with what the MOU says, has to be actually the next meeting after the completion of the election. So we'd say in here within 30 days, but if we layer it on with the MOU, it has to be probably the first meeting in November. So that's just something to note here, and that makes the timeline very tight. It looks nicer than it is really when we say within 30 days. That's just something to note. And maybe, again, if the MOU is something we could put in the parking lot for the MOU, if it's ever reopened, maybe to revisit that requirement that it's the first meeting after to something different, that it's like within 30 days or something like that.
No, that makes sense. And so I guess, can we, on the timeline, let's put this on as kind of a draft, kind of in red or blue or a different color, so we kind of know that it's tentative, it's got to be worked on. And then we can look at it. And yeah, it's possible that it's too tight and not possible. Yeah, I completely agree. And what is next here?
That's all the edits for this document.
Cancel. Sorry, my printer just asked me to reinstall firmware, which I don't want to do that, so I can't see anything. Okay, so that's it for this document.
Yeah, I think we'd say yes, unless there's anything else that committee members read or want to discuss
Right.
and revisit. But if you want to vote on this being the draft final next meeting, then maybe board members can have more time, or sorry, committee members could have more time if they would like to make any final comments.
So can we give everybody a little homework and say, take one final read through of this, get your final comments into the staff, and like I said, I'd like to take a vote on this next week, and that would mean if there are any changes or amendments, we would have to adopt them next week, and kind of I hope that we can approve a final product, as well as sort of keep us moving forward towards finalization, which brings us to the operations plan. No, we did that. We were going to discuss board member role for non-officers. Yes. So this is just sort of a preview. The next section is going to be kind of like a member's handbook that we've talked about before. There it is. And Tegan and staff have gone through and pulled out the relevant sections from the MOU that talks about what staff responsibilities, member responsibilities are, and member sort of rights. This is where, for instance, we should reference what Dennis just talked about, where any member can request an agenda item be added to an upcoming agenda, and also note what they can and cannot do. And so just to say that this is what we're going to be discussing next after we get through sort of finalizing the officers. And the bullet points that you see here are things that we're going to kind of try to put some tease out, put some framing around. The MOU again is both incredibly vague and incredibly specific in terms of often in conflict with itself. So we're going to have to sort of interpret what these mean, especially, the bullet there under 2011 MOU, and under the certification review. So I guess the request is have a look at this worksheet in preparation for the next meeting. There are certain things that we need to discuss, especially around the election of members. And again, I wish Eric were here. Talk about this. This is where we will try to codify how we do the elections, who cannot come, who speaks for a community, who doesn't speak for a community, how do subregions sort of coordinate with themselves, what is a member item that's always on the agenda, what is and isn't a member item, the distinction between a member and a designee. For instance, in the advisory board, the city or town as embodied in their chief executive officer is automatically the member ex officio, and they may appoint a designee to represent their community. We kind of do that. We don't really have a credentialing process right now that I'm aware of, other than we all kind of know who does and doesn't represent a community. So we're going to have to talk about credentialing. What does that mean? If I can't be there and I send somebody, how do we alert the chair and the vice chair and the staff that that's happening? And then we do have to talk about and ensure that we are fully aware and compliant with both open meeting law and Robert's rules. And I think most of us, given that we work in communities, are pretty familiar with open meeting law, but I think should definitely make reference to it. And then the code of conduct question has kind of come up. Again, not because there's any real concern, but it's something that I think we're all seeing more often in our own communities. Certainly around being respectful in your discussions with other members, being cordial, stuff around, which I guess we're all very used to, conflicts of interest, sort of how you recuse yourself or things like that. So that's all going to have to get discussed. And again, I'm not too worried about it because I think anybody that's certainly a local elected official or an appointed official deals with this already. I don't think we need to do financial disclosures, for instance. God knows we do enough of that already. But you know, we should have a code of conduct that at the very least spells out what is and isn't sort of needed for these things. So these questions here are going to be sort of what we talk about next week. I'm sorry if you can hear my dog snoring in the background. It's not my wife, I promise. It is my dog. There's also, we will have to talk about how we interact with the press. If there are people that get asked questions by the media, how do we do that? So, and finally, the MOU does, I think, require or state that we should meet off-site. Was it once a quarter? We're clearly not doing that. The MOU didn't really envision meeting like this. So we'll have to kind of wrestle with that and what that all means. So all of that is a very long preview just to say we're going to talk about members next time after we get through officers. So Tegan, I'm looking at you. Did I miss anything?
No, I'm sorry, my cursor always goes away. No, absolutely not. And I think this is just one of those areas where we have I would say, relatively speaking, very little kind of codified yet or written down. So that's why there are so many questions for discussion. Below this, you will see some beginnings of writing up certain things around meetings and attendance and things like that. It's just a start. I really don't think it covers these kind of bigger discussion questions. So yeah, that's this topic.
Great. Yeah. So kind of what does it mean to be a member of the board and how do you go about doing it? That's all for next time on the A&F committee. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And so we'll move on. Speaking of, are there any member items? I don't see any. Tegan, you have one.
I'm not a member, I know, but I wanted to add one more just update for folks on the work. We are currently working on mapping out a plan to reach a finish line of developing all these sections of the operations plan. So we're mapping out the rest of the topics we have over the coming month. We're trying to be realistic given that the A&F committee also has finance related meetings at times. So we need to make sure we leave room for those. But if we could ask those of you in this committee to reserve I think we said it was correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, the first and third sort of in advance of the MPO meetings going forward, try to hold that time because we are going to try to have as many of these as we can to keep these topics moving so that we can be done hopefully early in the next calendar year. But we do have a lot of discussions still to have.
Right. Which brings me to my member item, which is our next meeting is October 6th at 9 a.m. So 6, 20, then November 3rd, 17, et cetera, et cetera. So please try and block your calendars as best as you can for that. I know there are inevitable conflicts, but we appreciate that. Any other member items? Anything from staff? Anybody? Anything from anyone else? Okay, seeing none. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, without objection, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.